Hi everyone, my name is Vili and you are listening to Humans of Authenticity, the CEO Special Edition. Our guest today is Jim Fielding. He is an author, a coach, a keynote speaker, and president of Agile Grace Collab Group. He has a very interesting career span between corporate sectors and nonprofit, from Disney stores worldwide to Make-A-Wish foundations. Welcome to Humans of Authenticity, Jim.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
Would you like to introduce yourself to our listeners first?
Sure. I'm Jim Fielding. I am spending my time now as an author and speaker and coach. I'm president of Archer Grade Collab, where I do advising and consulting in the brand and retail space, particularly experiential retail. I'm a proud Ohio native, Toledo, Ohio, the middle of the USA. Went to school at Indiana University, and I've had a really interesting and varied career in both retail and media and entertainment, and worked for some of the world's leading brands like Disney, The Gap, and DreamWorks and Fox. And now I'm spending my time coaching and speaking and giving back. I really feel this chapter of my life is about using all my years of experience and the skills I've gained and helping other people achieve their full authenticity and whatever their definition of success is. I'm about authentic leadership. I didn't know it had a name, honestly, until I started to write the book and did a lot of research on different leadership styles. But, my entire leadership philosophy is I want to create physically and psychologically safe workplaces and communities where people can bring their full authentic selves and stories to the job. That's my entire philosophy.
If you can summarize your story, 3 words, what will they be?
Challenging,
Yeah.
exciting, and constantly changing.
Should we unpack challenging first?
I spent the first part of my career not embracing my true authenticity as a gay man. And so I was living a double life that had so many challenges with it, just accepting my truth, my identity, and my sexuality, and then figuring out how to navigate in a professional environment with that truth and that authenticity. Yes, I worked for many of the world's leading brands and had incredible opportunities, but I worked hard for each one of them. And I was constantly studying, learning, growing, changing, and, being a president or a CEO of a retailer, president of Disney stores, CEO of Claire's, very, very challenging roles. 24/7 intensity. Challenging, not a bad word. Because I am a lifelong learner and I'm constantly curious and I always want to be growing. I always want to be developing new skills, new assets for my toolkit, I used to say. So I love that I had a challenging career. Challenging meaning it was never boring. It was never routine. It had a lot of ups and downs. It was more of a roller coaster than a merry-go-round. I think it was more moments of sheer joy and excitement, and frankly, moments of fear and moments of concern. That's how I would define the challenging one. Sure. Sure.
Are you happy to unpack your journey revealing your identity as a gay man to the rest?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That's part of the reason I wrote the book. When I was struggling with my truth and struggling with this aspect, I didn't see any books or guides or anything that were helping me. I truly believe that representation matters and that role models matter. I had known my entire life that I was gay. When I was younger, I didn't really understand it or have the words or the vocabulary for it, but I knew that I was different. But I think more importantly, growing up in the 70s and 80s in the Midwest in Ohio, I was defining different as wrong. Like different was not a good thing. Like I was supposed to be straight. I wasn't supposed to be gay. And so I hid it and I suppressed it and I tried to live a different way than what I was naturally born to live. And that created a lot of stress, a lot of mental health issues, and a lot of physical health issues. I started to have migraines, stress-related stomach issues. When I graduated college in 1987, it was really still the height of the AIDS crisis, particularly in the US. There was a lot of homophobia. There was a lot of discrimination. And I was actually told by people who did know my truth that I would do better if I hid it, like that I really shouldn't share my truth. I shouldn't live authentically if I wanted to, quote, be successful. In my first job out of university, I did not live my authenticity. And 2.5 or 3 years after starting that job, I was having these mental issues and these physical issues is when I made the decision that I had to search for a company and a position that was going to accept me for who I was, that I was ready to come out at work. But what I also realized, V, is that in order to come out at work, I had to come out to my family, right? There was my sister and a few close friends that knew my truth, but they were basically helping me live a lie. And I was putting pressure not only on myself, I was putting pressure on them as well. And so when I made the decision to leave my first company and actively search for another position, I write in the book, it was the first time I ever interviewed as an out gay person. And I want to stress to your listeners, that doesn't mean that I walked into the interview carrying a pride flag and wearing rainbows and stuff. It just meant that when I prepared for the interview and did my fact checking and my studying on the company, when questions were asked, if anything got into anything to do with my personal life, I answered them truthfully. And at the same time, I had to go through the journey of coming out to my friends and coming out to my parents. I didn't want to live one way at work and one way at home. For me, it was like once the proverbial door had opened, I had to go through it and there was no turning back. And that's when I went to work for The Gap. They were based in San Francisco. The Fisher family that had founded The Gap was an ally for our community. And I think I interviewed with 5 or 6 different people to get that job, all of whom were straight, by the way, but it just wasn't an issue. And so for me, showing up at work that first day, it was like I had lost 150 pounds of burden that I was like carrying around. When I tell the story in the book, those 9 years I spent at The Gap, and then every company since got the best version of Jim Fielding because I was just fully me. As I grew and as I learned and accepted myself more and more, and then started to love myself unconditionally, I got more productive at work. I think I got more creative. I think I got more innovative. I became a better manager, a better leader, a better team player. But more importantly, I just became a better human being, a better friend, son, brother, and partner because I was living the life I was supposed to live.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
I can hear a lot of passions and a lot of colors that are coming out after that. Are you comfortable sharing with us your story before you come out?
I struggled. Middle school and high school were pretty horrible for me. I was called many names and I was verbally, physically, and emotionally bullied to the point of where I would have bruises and emotional scars. And, quite honestly, I wrote in the book that there was more than one time I considered what the world would be like without me. I considered alternatives to living. I never pursued any of them, but I had a couple of episodes that were scary. My parents were struggling with me because they could see I was struggling, but they didn't have the vocabulary to talk to about it and talk to me about it. Middle school and high school, honestly, were pretty miserable. For anybody that knows me, I was like, I have got to get out of Toledo, Ohio. And how to get out of Toledo, Ohio was I had to have really good grades. I had to be very involved in school. I had to get scholarships and go away to university. So I poured myself into studying. I was in student council, a German club, and National Honor Society. And I ended up graduating in my high school. My high school class had over 700 people, and I was ranked number 7 in the class. I was top 10 in the class because that was my way out. It's not an understatement to say that going to Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana, in many ways saved my life. Even though I didn't come out while I was in Indiana, that community was a very welcoming community. And it's ironic to me, V, that I chose a school that now to this day is still ranked in the top 20 in the United States for being safe and supportive for the LGBTQ community. We didn't have those rankings when I was looking at schools in 1982 and 1980, but I felt comfortable there and I was able to explore, experiment, learn, grow, and get to know myself better. And I also had the opportunity to study overseas in Copenhagen, Denmark, which again changed my perspective. And I progressively was getting more comfortable with myself, more comfortable with my truth. And for your listeners to understand the journey, for a long time, I identified as bisexual. I was attracted to men and to women, and I thought that was my truth. And the more I grew up, the more I matured, I realized I'm homosexual. I prefer men. It was a lot of anxiety. It was a lot of negative self-talk because I perceived that it would have been easier to just be a straight white man. Quite honestly, the systems and the world were built for straight white men, right? So it was almost like I wasn't able to access some of the systems that were built for people like me because by accepting my truth, I was marginalizing myself. I was becoming a minority and accepting the fact that I was a minority. And I struggled with that for sure.
I hear a lot of courage in how you putting yourself outside of the boundaries that everyone created for you.
Mm-hmm.
Was there a defining moment that tell you that, Jim, this is it? You have to tell the world your truth?
It's my sister, Jill, who I read a lot about in the book. I only have one sister, and she's one of my best friends in the world, really forced my hand because she was getting married. And she asked my roommate, who everybody called my roommate, but was actually my partner, to be in the wedding. And she said to me, I'm giving you 6 weeks to tell mom and dad. And if you don't tell mom and dad, I'm going to tell mom and dad because I can't explain to them why your quote roommate is in my wedding. And I think that was a really pivotal moment, to your point, because I realized that I had put her in such an awkward position for too long. And that not only was I lying to my parents, I was asking my sister to lie to my parents. We grew up in a household with a mantra, Fieldings don't lie. And not only was I lying, I was asking her to lie. And so I told my mom first, and that went well. And then I told my dad, and that did not go well. I mean, we talk about the roller coaster. My dad did not accept it. And we had very minimal communication for over a year after I told him. We really only communicated by letter, like old fashioned. He typed his letters. I wrote my letters with stamps and envelopes. And a second pivotal moment is when I flew to where they lived in Florida, because I was so tired of the estrangement from my father. I respected him so much and I loved him so much. And I don't know if I wanted his acceptance, but I at least wanted his acknowledgement. And I wanted access to him again. I felt like I'd been cut off to him. So I'd say that second pivotal moment is when I flew to their house in Florida. I stayed in their guest room. I did not stay at a hotel. I was forcing the issue. I knew what I was doing. And that was a really hard couple of days, but we talked and we talked and we talked. My dad was a very smart man, very fact-based, very research-based. And I think the more and more I shared my story and my truth and how I was feeling, the more, I'm not saying he was comfortable, but I think the more he understood it. And I came to understand that he was actually struggling with it, not as much from accepting the fact that he had a gay son. I think he was protecting me. I think he thought by being a gay man, I was going to be discriminated against and my career was not going to be as successful. And of course, there was the AIDS issue and so the health issue. I remember saying to him when we finally got to that point, and there was tears and there was hugging and there was reconciliation. I said, God, I wish you could have said this to me a year ago. It would have saved us so much time. And he said, I didn't know it a year ago, but he had learned. And I often share that story with younger members of the LGBTQ community who are estranged from their family. And I'm not saying my story is the same for everybody, but my dad was a great example of someone who did learn and who did change. We lost him, my gosh, 12 years ago now. But by the end of his life, my dad could have been president of the Gay Straight Alliance. I mean, he was so supportive of the community and so supportive of me. When I was 22, I would have never guessed that. My dad was just a brilliant example of someone who learned and who did love me unconditionally. And it took us a while to get there, but we got there.
How are you feeling right now?
I miss him. It's one of the hardest things about the book, V, is that he would have loved this book. He would have loved the fact that I wrote the book. He would have loved the fact that I was on a book tour and doing these podcasts and telling our story. And even though there's some hard stories in the book that expose a lot of issues in our family, I think he would have been so proud of me. And I would have loved to have had him attend some of the events, book readings and book signings. He would have really enjoyed it. My dad was very smart. He was mayor of his town, Port St. Lucie, Florida, very active in politics and a fireman and an arson investigator and a Coast Guard veteran. I mean, he was just a really interesting man. We lost him at 72, which is just too young. I wish he was still here now.
I'm sorry to hear that. But
Thanks.
I hope that you know that we all have our loved one in our heart, wherever we are.
Yeah. No, I feel him. He's in my heart. He's in my head. He's a guardian angel for sure. I think he supportive of this path I'm taking now with the coaching and the speaking and the writing. I do think he's proud.
That's a really beautiful sentiment. Thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Sure.
Now, to our listeners, Jim mentioned the book a few times. I'm going to show the cover of the book on the.
Oh, thank you.
Jim, if you can summarize your book in one sentence, how would you do it?
One sentence. It's a leadership and life lesson book designed for anyone who wants to share their authentic story.
Nice. So that's On Pride, No Ego by Jim Fillmore. I'll put a link in the show notes after
thank you
guys
so
are
much.
interested to have a look at the book. Let's move to the keyword conversation. Jim, you selected a very interesting and big word here.
I chose kindness, and I love that V does this. When you sent me my list of possible words, kindness struck out to me. And really, it's the last lesson in my book. The last lesson in my book is authentic kindness is more important than being right or being first. That's part of my philosophy, is that I believe how you move in life and how you achieve the goals in your life is as important as achieving the goal itself. More important than, quote, winning, or more important than being first. I wanted people to say that I was kind and that I was thoughtful and that I had compassion. And so it's really about EQ, emotional intelligence. When I run into people that I worked with 10, 15, 20 years ago, and they say, I really enjoyed that job. Like, that was one of my favorite jobs in my career because you made me feel special and you cared about us and you were always kind and you always had a smile and you always remembered my name. It's funny. That's one of the things people always say about me. You always remembered my name and you always called me by my name. I think that's kindness. I think, as you and I wrote, V, to each other, I just think the world, we've lost some of that civility. I don't think there's enough kindness in the world. I don't think there's enough just being gentle and gracious and kind to each other. I see every day when I'm out in the world, actual acts of unkindness and conflict. And I'm not saying that we all have to be perfect and that there's no conflict in the world and there's no arguments and there's no sad days. But I think it's just, if we're gentler and kinder with each other, it's much easier to handle the tough times. And I also think I love the word because it's about reminding me to be kind to myself and to make sure that I'm mentally and emotionally and physically strong and centered. So I love that word. I think it has so many levels, and I want to live in a kinder world.
For me, it is a very big word because it encompasses so many different areas. Like we have, compassion, empathy, nurturing, all of that encompassing under kindness. So I'm so excited when you pick this word.
I read it. I just kept coming back to it. It almost like it was capitalized, glowing at me. Like I was like, kindness, kindness.
Thank you. For the next part of these conversations, I'd like to unpack how we show up with kindness. Do you have an example that you can share with us?
One of the quotes that has driven my life is, may we leave our corner of the world a little better than we found it. It was in my graduation speech when I was 17, and I still use it today. Kindness is at the root of that. I consciously think about any situation I enter, a discussion with family, with friends, a lunch, attending a meeting. I want to add value. I want to leave the situation and be able to say to myself that I added value to that event. I added value to that meeting, even if it's lunch with a friend that you've known for 40 years. For me, kindness is smiling, making eye contact, and actively listening to the other person or the other people in the room to make sure that their viewpoints are getting shared and that they feel valued and they feel worthy, particularly with people from marginalized communities or historically underrepresented communities. There's oftentimes, by nature, we feel undervalued or we feel not listened to or we feel talked over. That's the opposite of kindness. When people are treated with kindness, it's a visceral feeling, like you feel it. It's almost like a warmth or a comfort. And when you're not treated with kindness, that feels like a certain amount of fear and anxiety. And so I think it's a word that translates in all cultures and in all languages. I've worked with people around the world. I've had direct reports in Asia and Europe and South America and Africa. And I think kindness is a very universal feeling and word. They might have different words for it, but I think it's still a feeling that people truly understand.
I want to bring this concept of kindness down to the smallest unit of our relationship.
Sure.
So that's family relationship. And I want to bring your story with your dad into this conversation. You mentioned a couple of times that there wasn't the vocabulary so that the two of you can express your emotion and how you care for each other. Because there is no vocabulary, that's being perceived as distance and unkind, just to bring our keyword into the conversation. If you can speak to parents or loved one of individuals from the LGBTQ plus community, what sort of vocabulary can you equip them with? How do you prepare them so that they can have this conversation, so that they can show up with kindness for the one that they love and care for?
Yeah, that's an amazing question. It really comes back to a term I also said earlier, which is unconditional, and what unconditional love is. I think all human beings want to be loved and accepted unconditionally. And my definition of unconditional is you take all of me, the good, the bad, the ugly, the sexuality, the identity, you take it all, right? If you say you love me, or if you like me, or you want to be my friend, I want you to accept me unconditionally. A lot of times when I talk to parents or family members who may be struggling with an LGBTQ plus individual in their family, I say, okay, well, let's step back and talk about unconditional love. Unconditional acceptance is a term that most people understand, because I think most human beings would like to be accepted unconditionally. I'll give you an example. This was a big talking point with my father that got us to kindness. I had to say to him, as I got more mature and more comfortable, Dad, it feels like you would love me more if I was straight. That is not unconditional. That is conditional love, right? It's like if you were straight, or you were married to a woman and you had 2 kids and a dog and a house, I would love you more. I would accept you more. That's the opposite of unconditional. That is conditional love. And I think the other thing I try to give them vocabulary, when you talk about vocabulary, V, is parents saying to their kids, or it's just saying it's a parent-child relationship. It could be anybody in your family, your sister, your brother. I may not fully understand your truth or your lived experience, but I want to. And I want you to explain to me how I can be an ally for you and how I can make you feel more comfortable. My dad wasn't a gay man. I didn't expect him to understand everything I was going through. I still didn't fully understand everything I was going through when I was in my teens and in my 20s. But I wished when I was 16 and 17, and I would come home with obvious bruises or obvious emotional trauma, that we would have had the ability to sit down and say, tell me what happened. Tell me what the cause of this was, and what's the real underlying cause of it. We didn't have that vocabulary. We didn't have that kind of relationship dynamic. So it would just be like, I'd say, oh, I got in a fight at school, or, oh, I fell downstairs. Like I would make up some lie and I would just park it. And to be fair, I wasn't giving him an opportunity to engage because I wasn't really sharing the truth. But I also didn't feel from him that safety of that unconditional acceptance. And so when parents ask me these questions about unconditional love, say to them, I love you exactly the way you are, and I will always accept you the way you are. There's like really simple phrases that completely change a person's demeanor and completely change a person's psyche. It's putting them in a psychologically and physically safe environment. That, you know, when you're an LGBTQ individual at whatever age, by nature, you don't always feel psychologically and physically safe, because there are people in the world who actively want to hurt you and do not want to accept you. And so you always are on guard. You're always aware. You're always conscious of your circumstances and your surroundings. And when you can let that guard down and just kind of let that veneer down and truly just breathe, right? Just exhale. It's such an amazing feeling. And I want to help parents who are struggling with their children create that environment where they just exhale, where they just breathe, and where they just be. I don't know if you saw the Love, Simon movie. Love, Simon is a movie that we did at Fox. It's one of the most proudest things I ever did at Fox. And there's a line where Simon, who's a high school senior, and he comes out to his parents, basically. And he sits down with his mom, and his mom's amazing. She happens to be a psychologist, so she's probably got better vocabulary than other people. And she said, I just want you to breathe. And I honestly think you're the most Simon that I've ever seen you be right now. That's the feeling, that it's okay, that we're not broken, that there's nothing wrong with us. There's nothing that can be fixed. We are who we are. No different than a Black person is a Black person, a Latin person is a Latin person, a female is a female. We are who we are.
I think it's about we are humans, right?
Totally. Part of what I write in the book and some of the positive affirmations I do to myself is I'll literally say to myself, Jim, you are exactly where you're supposed to be right now. Exactly. Like in my mind, V, I know that I'm supposed to be talking to you right now, doing the Humans of Authenticity podcast. This is supposed to be. And that I'm doing what I was meant to do, and I'm living the life I was meant to live. That's a huge, huge affirmation for someone who lived a lot of his life trying to be something he wasn't.
I think the key word for me here is permission.
Yes.
As a parent, by saying, I love you the way you are, I accept you the way you are, they give the kids permission to fully express themselves. The parents also give themselves permission
Totally.
to accept and to love the kids. And I think that's the exact vocabulary.
Mm-hmm. That's a great word.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're making me tear up a little bit, though. That's the word. And it's two-way. Not only are you giving me permission to be the best version of myself, you are giving yourself permission to love the best version of self. I still have my mom, and of course I still want my mom to be happy with me. I think you're always going to be in that parent-child relationship. And so when she says, I love you, or I'm proud of you, or I miss you, it carries so much weight.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
Sure.
Let's move to the workplace context.
Sure.
How do we show up with kindness in the workplace environment?
You know, I tell companies that I speak with or I coach, it starts with how people are treated from the application process, the interview process, right? The relationship with your company or the relationship with your group starts when you post a job and send in applications. I mean, how many times have you sent in an application to a company and you're like, oh, it just went to a black hole, right? It went to some email. And I would say to my people, we have a responsibility to at least send an acknowledgement email that we received your resume. That is an act of kindness. Like, at least you know it's somewhere. It doesn't mean you're going to get an interview. It doesn't mean you're going to get the job. But so many people will be like, oh, you just have to email this random job application at Disney.com. And it feels like a black hole. It feels very impersonal. So if you have a job and you write the job description, treat the people with dignity that actually apply for the job. Then when you go through the applications or the resumes and you pull people in for an interview, treat them with dignity and respect. Be on time, be organized, smile, thank them for coming in for the interview because they took time out of their life. They might be working somewhere else. They might have had to take time off work or put their child in daycare to come for the interview. Them coming to interview with you, be gracious about it. Thank them, respect their time. If the interview is supposed to be at 9:15, bring them into the interview at 9:15. Don't bring them in at 10 o'clock. That's disrespectful. Follow up after the interview, whether they get the job or not get the job, whether they get a second interview or not get a second interview, follow up, an email, a phone call. And then when you do hire them and you bring them on board and their first day at work, make sure they get the proper training, the proper orientation, make sure they get, where's their seat? Do they have a computer? Where's the bathroom? Where do you go to eat? I mean, just think in simple human terms. People are nervous on their first day of work. They're joining a team that exists already. Make it easier for them. And I always said, if you work on my team, I want to create a physically and psychologically safe space for you, but I also want to invest in developing you and teaching you. And I want you to be feeling like you're part of a high-performing culture and that you're valued from day one. One of the most unkind things is people say, oh, there's like this 90-day training period or 120-day training period. before we listen to them. I think that's so weird. I think that's unkind. If you hired this person and you went through the interview process, you value something in them. Let them participate. It's not like I feel like you have to earn your rights. I always felt passionately about the cultures I built, that they were a work hard, play hard kind of environment. Of course, we worked hard. I mean, I was working at Disney, I was working at DreamWorks, I was working at the Gap. These were high performing companies with high expectations. So we worked very hard, but I also took the time to celebrate achievements, to celebrate birthdays, to celebrate when someone was getting married or when someone had a baby. And we would try once a quarter to do some kind of an offsite training. Sometimes we just went bowling. I realized that Los Angeles, where I spent most of my career, Los Angeles is a very competitive job market. There's many jobs available. And I felt like if I was going to retain the best and the brightest, I had to make them feel valued and I had to be kind. So I think there's many examples of how kindness comes throughout the employee journey.
I'm going to show you a challenge here.
Sure.
Obviously, when we decided to hire someone, we know that they are the best at the game, the best at the pool.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, humans, right?
Yeah.
We are not perfect. Eventually, like you said earlier, the good, the bad, and the ugly will show as
Yeah.
we interact more with these new staff members.
Yeah.
How do you show up with kindness when you start seeing the bad and the ugly?
Oh, I love this question, V, and I get asked it a lot. Guess what? I worked at some of the world's largest companies. We were constantly reorging and restructuring, and I had performance issues I had to manage, and sometimes I had to reduce my team. I had to do layoffs, reductions in force. First off, let's talk about a performance issue because that's different than a reduction in force. Performance issue, there is a process and documentation involved in that. I would always try to coach to improve the performance first or work with my manager. Sometimes it was my manager who had a problem with one of their employees. And so it'd be like a three-way meeting. I always went in with the positive intent that with coaching, people could get better. I did enter most of those meetings with that. But I also was a strong enough professional to realize sometimes it just wasn't working. It wasn't a right fit culturally. It wasn't a right fit skill set wise. And we would have to coach that person out. And what I always worked with my human resources department and my managers was to make sure that we treated those people with dignity, that we kept those conversations confidential, no hallway chatter, no rumors and gossip mongering, and that they left knowing that they were still a valuable human being. They might not be a right fit for that culture or that job, but it does not mean that they weren't valued. And that they would leave with a severance package. They would leave with some outplacement assistance. When I would get a direction from the heads of the company that we had to reduce 15% of our workforce, I hated those directions personally, but I always tried to treat people with transparency, dignity, and respect. And on a 15% layoff, that impacts your entire team. Not only the people that get impacted, the 85% that don't get impacted usually end up taking on more responsibility. And they also have almost a little bit of survivor's guilt. And so you really have to manage your entire team in that process because people that they've worked with are there one day and then not there the next day. That can be very jarring for a team overall. As a leader and manager, I would always concentrate on over communicating and transparency, again, respecting confidentiality, so that when people knew it was going on, we weren't hiding behind closed doors, right? Because those days where that would happen, people would be sitting at their desk nervously waiting for their phone to ring, thinking they were next, right? The one thing I always did as a manager that I think is when the layoffs or the reductions were done, I would pull everybody physically together in a room and I would say, we're done. By the way, we're done. Yes, you lost some comrades and some peers today, but there are no more because I wanted to remove those nerves. I always prepared with my HR partner to treat people with dignity and respect. I run into people in the world that I have laid off at conferences or at college campuses. Of course, they're not happy they got laid off, but I want them to say, you treated me with dignity and respect. You treated me with kindness, which is what we have to do.
What I'm hearing from your story is when you talk about laying off, you're not referring to these as the positions. The way that you manage this process is the actual humans involved in the process.
100%. Yeah, humans.
I hear a lot of coaching that you provide in those conversations, and I think that's where the humans coming out of that conversations is not just the process and the documentations and the policy and the privacy confidentiality agreement, but it is the coaching aspect to it that you make sure that the individual being impacted is treated properly with kindness.
And
So
by the way, I've had my position eliminated twice. When NBC Universal bought DreamWorks, I was laid off. And when Disney bought 20th Century Fox, my position was eliminated. And one of those experiences was handled well, and one of those experiences was not handled well as the employee. And I felt the difference. One of them, I was treated with dignity and respect and kindness. And the other one, it felt very formulaic, to your point. Here's your folder, here's your benefits, here's the outplacement. It just felt very routine and not humanistic at all. And that sticks with you.
thank you for sharing that. I love for the last part of the conversations. What is your mantra as a leader?
I want to be a human being, not a human doing. As the leader, I never want to feel like I'm becoming robotic or formulaic and I'm just doing a job. That I really wanted to be present and authentic and feeling everything. Another mantra I have is 2 heads are better than 1. I think anybody that ever worked for me would say that I was not the kind of leader or manager who sat in my office and issued memos or emails and said, do this, do this, do this. It was about collaborating with people and pulling people together. And I wanted to pull creativity and ideas and problem solution out of the group. And my last one, which is actually the first lesson in the book, is control the controllable, but leave space for the possible. I was known as a manager who delivered things on time and on budget. But at the same time, I did not want to be an anal retentive control freak that scheduled every moment of the day and didn't allow me or my team the freedom to just imagine and create and innovate. You know, I always worked in very creative industries, retail and media and entertainment. And I always wanted to make sure we had that mind space to be imagining and be thinking. So it's my formula.
Is there a connection between kindness and your mantra as a leader?
I think even when I read reviews about myself from all my years, I always get written down that I had very high EQ, emotional intelligence. I think I always led with kindness, empathy, and compassion, and I was known for that. And I think that's why people actually liked working with me. One of the things I write about in the book is I had people that worked with me at Disney that moved to work with me at DreamWorks, that moved to work with me at Fox. That was their choice. Of course, I was thrilled for them to come because we had a relationship, we had a history. We understood each other. But I think because of the kind of leader I was and because of the kind of cultures I built and the kind of work environments I built, people wanted to be in that kind of environment. And even Fox, which was a very short tenure, we were only there 2.5 years. But even people that worked with me at Fox said, even though that was hard being taken over by Disney, it was their favorite job. I love when people say that to me.
That's really the testaments to the work that you've done and how you show up. Thank you.
And yeah, think about it, V. It's not like anybody ever writes you an email and says, I'm so glad we beat our goals by 20%. That's not what they remember, right? They remember the fact that we did something fun with The Simpsons or we did something fun with Bob's Burgers. They remember that stuff.
Yeah, we always remember how others make us feel.
Totally. Totally. And that we're treated with kindness.
Yeah, nice. Thank you so much for that. This is the end of the episode. Thank you again for your time and sharing your story.
My name is Jim Fielding, and you are listening to Humans of Authenticity, the CEO Special Edition.